Call to order the Wednesday, February 14th, 2024 Planning Commission and Council Chambers. Who's taking I should take a roll?
I can call roll.
Nate, would you call a roll?
Yes. Commissioner Assen,
Here.
Commissioner Baswa is absent, Commissioner Campbell. Absent, Commissioner Gari,
Here.
Commissioner Kerber,
Here.
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Purdy,
Here.
Commissioner Urbanski,
Here.
and Chair Brass.
Here. With that, we will move on to adopt an agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second. First by Urbanski, second by Olson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Agenda adopted. Visitor presentation. If there is anybody in the crowd that would like to talk to the commission, that's the time.
There's no one online.
Don't online. And so with that, we'll move on to approve the previous meeting minutes. Everyone reviewed those. I can make a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
Second, so we got all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. No consent items. And so we move on to action item 7A. And sorry,
Yeah, we're
Yep.
working through some technical.
who's presenting tonight?
It's me.
Okay, take it away, please.
Yeah, give me just 1 second here.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. It's always, my computer seems to hate this room, so
Does it like refresh and kind of like blink off and on?
it won't let me connect to the internet.
Okay.
So worse than that, I would say. Okay, so tonight before you is a concept plan by Matthew Reiland of Johnson Reiland Builders and Remodelers for the Carlson site. The site is generally located east of 212 and Rivertown Heights Development, north of Chaska Boulevard, and south of Big Woods Boulevard and Ensconced Woods Development. As the Planning Commission is aware, Chaska has a 3-step review process. Tonight, we are in the concept plan, so the first of that 3-step process. Each of those 3 steps does come before you. It also then goes to the City Council following. The concept plan review phase is general. So the plans that you'll see this evening are high level, just like our staff review. But as we continue to move through the process, those plans become more detailed and our review also becomes more detailed. The site, the Carlson site is 15.5 acres in size. It has some pretty significant topography. There's roughly a 60-foot elevation change from the highest point along the western property line down to the lowest point along the northern property line. There are 3 areas identified as steep slope on the property. So those are slopes that exceed 18%. There's a large one along that northern property line, a smaller one just to the south of that, and then a 3rd area along the southern property line. A tree inventory as of tonight has not been fully completed, but preliminary review of this site does indicate that there is a woodland area that exists on the property. A majority of the trees from aerial photography suggest that it's along that wooded steep slope through the center of the site. So the concept plan before you this evening contemplates extending access from 2 connection right-of-way extensions from Rivertown Heights 2nd Edition to the west and looping that through the Carlson site to provide access to 14 new lots. Those new lots would range in size from roughly 11,000 to 50,000 square feet, with the largest of those lots being on the eastern or the outer edge of that community. The remaining 1/3 of the site, so roughly 5 acres, would be platted as an outlot and retained by the current property owner to be part of a future development with the eastern lot. So the new homes that are being contemplated for the site would start roughly around 800,000. They would be 3,000 to 4,000 square feet in size, be a mix of 1 to 2 stories in height, and include 2 and 3 car garages. Step back for just 1 second. The concept plan also shows that these 3 inner lots, I'll call them, would be full basements. And then the outer ring lots would be a mix of lookouts and walkouts, overlooking again that sloped area. Utilities would be extended from Rivertown Heights Second Edition to the west. The stormwater design for that previous development did anticipate and contemplate stormwater for this road extension and the new lots. So this plan contemplates collecting that stormwater and directing it to the stormwater facilities that were part of that Rivertown Heights development. So they would be directed to a storm retention basin and some sediment ponds further to the west. More information would be submitted by the applicant in a future review phase to better understand if we're meeting those stormwater requirements. The property is currently zoned O, so open development. This is a holding zone essentially. So properties that were annexed into the city were rezoned this until they can be rezoned to an appropriate zoning district at the time of development. The applicant's narrative indicates that they plan to rezone as part of the preliminary plat phase to PRD or Planned Residential District. The comp plan does designate this property as low density residential, which has a density range of 2 to 5 units per net acre. The plan before you this evening is contemplating development at 1.3 units per net acre, which is below that comprehensive guide plan designation. A lot of that is the result of the site's topography and just the amount of buildable area on the property. So that is something that we'll continue to look at as we move through the review process. The concept plan generally does align with the ghost plat that was contemplated as Rivertown Heights Second Edition to the west. That plan, though, did contemplate 2 additional lots than what's being shown here. But really that reduction is the result of some lot reconfigurations that happened as part of Rivertown as it worked through from concept through to final plat. Ultimately, staff does feel that the setbacks that they're showing are reasonable. They'd be visibly similar to adjacent developments, and it really does allow for reasonably sized building pads and protection from that steep slope in the rear. One thing that staff will continue to work through with the applicant as we move through the process is the rear lot line. So currently the applicant is showing those rear lot lines and the properties extending into the steep slope areas to increase marketability of those lots as they continue to sell. Included in your packet this evening is staff's recommendation to adjust those rear lot lines to the 30-foot no grade, no mow setback line that's shown in red here on the screen before you. And really the reasons for that are staff feels that it's appropriate because the applicant is requesting reduced front and side setbacks. This adjusted lot line would provide the highest level of protection to the wooded steep slope. It would not affect the actual structure locations because there is still that 50-foot setback that supersedes this 30-foot setback. It does provide a clear delineation of the property and the rights for future property owners. And finally, it would help increase density to better align with the comprehensive guide plan. So again, the conditions provided to you this evening do include a condition to adjust to that. I would like to add, though, that as part of the process, we'd like to continue to work with the applicant to provide what would be a more reasonable rear lot line. You know, this red line, as you can tell, is a little jagged, if you will, so providing more straight and thought through rear lot lines to provide more clear denotation of property for those future owners.
Quick question for you. So on lot, go back. So on lots, there you are. 10 through 11. We got like, so we got the red no mow line. Is that also indicating around there? So like on lot 7, is that like getting right up to the house basically?
Yeah, so that let me zoom in, that might be helpful. So there is the 50-foot setback is this thinner black line. So that's coming to the rear of that building pad. This red line would be the 30-foot no grade, no mow. And it's
Anything
essentially just
in that
extrapolated.
red line. So you're kind of got like a no mow area kind of angled through your yard there. Kind of.
Yeah, so as staff, we had conversations about these lots because the slope is essentially bisecting them in half.
Right.
And so one of the conversations that we had internally was, does it make sense to adjust that rear lot line essentially to come through and follow that, what I'll call the northwest 30-foot line? And then, you know, this essentially buildable area that's not accessible from the top of the slope could be incorporated into that outlot area. The applicant hasn't indicated whether or not they would be open to that conversation other than just talking it through on the phone. So that's something that we would continue to look at as we move through the process.
So that if you, let's say you did change the back lot lines to come across, how is that in the code, how does that affect like the rear setback then? Because the rear setback's coming from the lot line that's further down, correct? Or am I
It's coming from the
The-
steep slope
The
setback.
from the
slope,
steep slope?
yep, the steep
Thank you.
slope setback is this 50
Got it. Okay.
here. So that's
Yep.
essentially that, you know, mimicking that 30-foot or that, excuse me, that 20-foot rear property line or that 50-foot. So it's essentially
Gotcha.
getting you to the same point to where that building pad is.
Okay. Thank you.
At the direction of staff, the applicant did put together a ghost plat for the remaining 5 acres. It also contemplated the 16-acre property further to the east that's held in common ownership with this property by the Carlsons. This ghost plat contemplates an additional 27 lots accessed by 2 newly constructed cul-de-sacs. But this plan is ultimately dependent on development of the Llano property as well, which is to the south of this property. So conceptually, the ghost plat is reasonable for purposes of review for this evening. However, staff would certainly look at, you know, natural features of the property to determine if they would either encourage or prohibit a through connection, either through the site or to that site to the south. As part of the concept plan review process, the applicant did hold a neighborhood meeting that happened in December. There were 3 residents that attended that meeting. They generally just inquired about side yard setbacks. Oops, as I did not finish my sentence there, and also the location of where those new homes would be in relation to their development. After the neighborhood meeting, there was 1 additional resident inquired with the applicant if access and right-of-way would be extended from his development, and he was in the Ensconced wood development to the north. And ultimately, he was fine with the application once he knew that that access wasn't coming from his neighborhood to the north. So with that, this evening, I'll take any questions and then would look for a motion to recommend approval of the concept plan, knowing that this would go to the city council on February 26th. So with that, Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Actually, all right, with that, the commission for discussion, any plans for, or any questions on the plans for city staff?
I have one just on I'll just say on the continuity of these neighborhoods now. Obviously, we knew the gross plat, we knew that they needed to extend it. But I guess for me, there's two parts that go with it. Because it's of an extension of the current development that's there, the River Heights. Why aren't we trying to keep things consistent for the remaining parts of that lot, knowing that we have these 14 lots that are going to be titled something and having different setbacks than the houses to the east and west and north of them. So I guess my side of things is it's being consistent. I mean, I get the fact that it's a different developer. That's fine, but it doesn't mean we call it Const Woods when it has no connection, no direct connection to the original, and it's butting up against, and it's just completing the loop of the current
Rivertone.
Rivertown. So I like I said, I'm kind of understand why staff wouldn't try to keep consistency or encourage consistency, or if there's certain things that staff is just like, do what you want to do.
Chair and Commissioner, I think I heard two things in there, so I'll maybe try to break them apart and then you can let me know if I missed one. Continuity in terms of naming conventions. It's not really the city staff's role to provide up feedback on, how they choose to name their neighborhoods. I mean, we certainly can provide feedback, and if that's something that you want to share with the applicant, that they, consider naming their development something else, that's certainly within your right to do. City staff would not be part of that conversation. In terms of continuity and setbacks, that's certainly, again, something that you can share with the applicant as feedback. Staff feels that their request is reasonable. Visually, 2.5 feet isn't going to be significant. And it also, again, helps them achieve a buildable pad that then helps us get greater preservation and protection from that steep slope. So we're kind of giving a little to get a little. And so there's kind of two parts of continuity that I heard in your question.
Yeah, and those were the two. I mean, okay. Thank you.
And then the ghost plat, that, again, it's just a placeholder. Don't have setbacks or anything of that established, just kind of shows how the lots could potentially be delivered when it becomes unlandlocked, let's say.
Chair, yeah, so maybe a good way to think about this in terms of level of detail is a ghost plat would certainly be at the bottom. So that's going to be extremely general.
Yep.
It's more just to see how it's contextually going to fit in with what's happening around it. Then you would move into the next ring of that triangle, which would be concept plan, which does include a little bit more detail, like again, what you're seeing this evening. So we're getting a little bit more site inventory, a little bit better understanding again of how that's fitting in. We have some site feature knowledge, so we can see how, as we move from ghost plat into concept plat, how that's working. And then as we continue to move then into preliminary plat, that's really when we see a lot of that detail. And so you'll kind of see this continuance of refinement in the plans as you move through it. But ghost plat, I would say, is more general than even concept plan.
Get back to Commissioner Olson's question on just the setbacks. So they're ever so slightly different than Rivertown next door. And then the first Ensconced Woods. And they do fall or meet within required setbacks? They're just different from the neighborhood?
Those are the setbacks that they're proposing. There are other developments in the city that have a similar setback, and the applicant has done other developments with those setbacks.
What are the city's
I
required
meant like-
setbacks?
Don't we have required setbacks for front and side and?
It's dependent on the particular zoning. So this, as a PRD, they're establishing their own setbacks.
Open,
What was that?
since it's open zoning, since it's an open,
Well, they would rezone to essentially a planned unit development, and as part of that planned unit development, that's when those setbacks pursuant to this development would be established. And these are the setbacks that they're proposing that the city would adopt as their setbacks applicable to that development.
I'm just looking for the clarification on that, 'cause I know we've done other neighborhoods with really tight, basically detached townhome type scenarios, and they've sold out, I'm sure.
What is the setback for Topo?
Yeah, I mean, in the question of what's required, I think Ashley kind of responded to that appropriately. We see a mix of setbacks throughout different developments. And we see side setbacks all the way down to 5 feet
Right.
in a lot of newer developments too. So the request for a 5-foot setback is not atypical of what we've seen in other developments within the city. One, for example, Del Webb, we did a 5-foot setback.
Right, and I recall some of that, and I'm just curious, more of the question was going back to if we had established setbacks for like this specific zoning. That like to see if they fell in, even though they're different from Rivertown, if they fell into like what our established setbacks were, but since we don't, and it's up to the applicant, then you guys review them.
Hmm.
Just wanted to understand that.
To seek a variance later on is what you're.
Yeah, there'll be no
It's just-
variance,
right,
it's just.
Not for
up-
the
not the
setbacks, no.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because the 23, I mean, again. I feel as if people will buy what they want to buy, the market will dictate that,
Mhm.
I'd be more concerned about from the slope, and so you're moving it 2 feet forward to. Keep it 2 feet off of the slope to garner that rear setback more importantly,
Correct, yep.
okay,
But there's only one, maybe 2 lots that have that kind of close restriction. So I'm just gonna put it out there. It's like, I'm gonna propose that they follow the same setbacks as Rivertown Heights. I mean, there's no reason why they would have 23 versus 25 or 5 versus 7.5. There's no conceptual reason for it, except for they want to build a bigger house on the lot.
I thought it was so they could have more room behind for,
right.
2 feet.
For the behind one.
right?
Right, but that's
Yeah.
2 feet. So back to that point, and they're using like I said, I've made my case there, and I'll bring it up afterwards as well too. There's no reason why it can't be consistent, because it's finishing up the loop for Rivertown. I know it's a different developer, I know it's a different, landowner, so they can choose, but it's our responsibility to be able to be the check and balance, to be able to say what is the right thing for this specific development. And we're only talking 2 feet, so it's a matter of bring it back and it can be consistent.
Before I have you guys come up, so we can open up more discussion, is there any other questions for staff? Anything specific in regards outside of the setback issue? Going once? Nope, okay. All right, if anyone would like to present to the commission, please, it's not an open hearing, but please come forward.
Good evening, I'm Dave Nash with Alliant Engineering, the project engineer for this. Just one of the things I want to point out on that table, I think staff could confirm, Ensconced Woods had 5 and 5 setbacks.
They do, yeah.
Not,
I-
so,
Was there a typo on there?
yeah, there's a typo. We're matching what Ensconced Woods was approved at. And it's the same builder. Couple reasons why we're asking for the smaller ones is compared to D.R. Horton. D.R. Horton's a mass builder. They're not a custom builder. These are going to be more custom homes. And I think they've proved in Ensconced Woods that they can work with the smaller setbacks and make it work. That allows them to get a wider house on the lots and not go as deep, and depth is, even if it's only a couple of those lots, it looks like we're still fighting slope on that east side. And the more we can make stuff wider and narrower, the better to keep off the slope. So that's one of the main reasons why we're asked for the smaller rear setback and at the 5 and 5 setbacks, which again, has been done in that area too. So other than that, I'm happy to answer any other questions. Paul Reiland with Johnson Reiland Homes here too.
So the rear setback doesn't affect it here, right? At least with your concern, it was the front setback. Is that correct?
Front and side,
Front and side.
because it's going from 7.5 to 5 and 25 to 23. And I guess we're going off with the table that was provided to us. So it's like, I didn't go back to look at Ensconced Woods or Rivertown. I expected to have the right information provided from staff. So if Ensconced Woods was 5, that's fine, but it's not connected to Rivertown. So that's the part where it's the finishing up the loop with Rivertown too is.
Well, just the intent of this development, even though it's connected to Rivertown, I mean, part of our plans, we have we plan to put a monument sign. They're going to do everything they can to segregate or make it identified as a different development than Rivertown Woods. That's important to Johnson Reiland, or the builder.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So you're gonna try to make it separate somehow?
It will be separate. It'll be a separate plat, separate ownership.
I know that, but I
And
meant
there's-
like, because like you drive into a neighborhood and it says like, it's like one loop,
Yeah, but
right?
we plan to have, in fact, our plans show a monument sign coming into it to identify it as a new neighborhood.
Both ways.
I don't know if we're doing both or we can do both. We're only proposing one right now, anticipating where most of the traffic will come from, but
From the north.
From the,
yep,
North or south.
or south. We have it on the south. But if that's,
That's the part where it's like, it makes it difficult for us because this is the piecemeal of, because of the landowner, how they're selling and how things are getting developed. It's the, how do we as the city make it look like it's supposed to be one versus it's piecemealed? And when I say piecemealed, it's the, call it this neighborhood and that neighborhood. And literally, if you drive long enough, it'll go back to the other name. And it's,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, it's
from where
interesting because-
I'm living, I'm seeing that as you're driving through the neighborhoods, it's like, oh, it's this and then it's that. And then it's, but it's just because of the developer that build it, they got to name it. I get it.
Yeah, but it's a completely different style of home and everything else, so I can see where they'd want to have some difference.
But once the house is built,
It's gonna be,
it,
well,
is it, I mean,
I
Is it
think
make
you'll
it-
see once the houses are built and the product type difference, it'll look as a different.
it's deliberate to be different.
how do we as a city make it so that it's cohesive?
I think the point is that they don't want it cohesive.
No,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, this is a little more unique in the fact that it's basically a continuation of a road where if it was like the other side of the main road and like this side over here is a new neighborhood, I totally get it. Like it's a little bit unique in the fact that it is one road and like just a portion of the loop is a new neighborhood. It's,
And obviously,
So-
we didn't know that with the gross plat when it came,
Right,
when Rivertown
sure.
came through. We just knew it was going to be developed. We knew it was going to
Yeah.
continue, and it's relatively holding to the same thing, except for
there's actually less lots apparently, right? It went from 16 to 14.
well, because they lost the 2 on the inside loop because of how things were platted.
Yeah.
There, so. So I remember seeing in your write-up that you mentioned something about sports courts in the backyards as well too. How many of the ensconced woods has sports courts being included I'm just asking a question. I understand. Zero. Okay, so zero that you know of right now of the original plans have sports courts. So to use that as a reason to look for variations of the setbacks, yet again, doesn't really hold up there.
So I mean, okay, yeah, go ahead.
All right, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we worked really hard. So we actually had a whole nother layout where we were gonna loop the road differently and come into the future phases. But it didn't work for the engineering and the steep slopes and disturbing those. So we've worked really hard to try to create a separate identity for the neighborhood. I realize it will be one city street, but with the monumentation and the extra large lots. And then also with the internal lots, I think it's 12, 13, and 14, those become more interesting with a rear setback. So whether that's a structure, a deck, possibly a sport court, something. I think I want you guys to understand that one of the unique things about Chaska that's driving buyers down here is that, you know, we can develop more of the available land on our lots. Whereas some communities have very restrictive rules on impervious surface and things like that. So that's driving people out of other communities into this community, which we see as a real positive. But the other thing about the 20-foot setback is that's going to become really important with some of those lots that are right up against those steep slopes. So that's the other reason. That's maybe a better reason for it. Maybe I shouldn't have put that other piece in there if you don't like sport courts. But you know, some of the families that are really into sports really like those features. So, but just in closing, these are D.R. Horton. Everything I've seen are very similar two-story homes. We're building right now over 50% of our buyers in the current Ensconced Woods are building Rambler one-story homes, and they tend to take up more width. It's very hard to get them to work. We also have planning standards for lot width, house, garage width, setback. So an extra 5 feet of width per lot actually helps quite a bit, especially with the one-story homes. So thank you. Any other questions? So, but it's the same product that's currently built in the current phase. So you can see what those products look like.
Thank you.
Are you gonna try and keep a lot of the trees in there then to kind of separate ensconced from Rivertone then also as just kind of a visual? This is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I realize from a top down, it looks like it's all one thing, but this piece of ground is very different in terms of the trees and the wooded slopes and actually the vistas. So their lots, with a few exceptions, really won't have long views over the river valley, things like that. Whereas these lots, most of these will on the outer edge. And then, yeah, there's the wooded steep slope areas. Those trees are protected by code. And then we will do everything we can to protect more trees like we did in the first phase. So these clients ask those questions. I have exhibits to show how many feet of trees and what the distances are between homes. And so they get real into the details. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, and then on the side setbacks, just when we did the first time we came in, we did a lot of proving to the staff and you guys about how we can do 5-foot setbacks with the customization of homes and dropping garage elevations and landscaping. And I think we're showing that in the current phase that we can do that. And it's very rare that a 5-foot setback on a curved linear street is 5 foot, you know, it's like 10 foot between homes. It might only be at a very small point, but you know, then the lots kind of fan out like this. So anyway, but it does help quite a bit with some of the designs, especially the 1-stories. So thank you.
All right, with that, we'll bring it back to commission. Or any more discussion on the lots? It's a little unique where they have a separate neighborhood within one horseshoe,
Right.
right? So that is a little bit different, but I understand where they're coming from. We've where we've had other neighborhoods in the city with 5-foot setbacks, 5-foot side setbacks, and they've done like Delwood, and I think we did one. I think we've done a few of them, where they're almost like detached townhomes, and if the market bears that it does, I mean, I understand Commissioner Olson's concern about the continuity, but I think ultimately, as they're the landowner, that, they could, I mean, it's a little bit of a tough one, because like ideally you'd want to have it one continuous kind of neighborhood, but that's not what they're going for, so it's a unique one.
We're working with a really unique contour of land here. too.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I'm not so, yeah, I mean, I personally don't mind the setbacks, whether it's here or another neighborhood anywhere, like the 5 has been done before and we've approved it, and whether it's 23 or 25 on the front for the slope. Fine, I guess the question is if we're okay as a commission with it just not being completely, visually, be a little bit different, but that's what their goal is, so they know you're entering like a different developer.
We're not dealing with associations or anything, right?
I don't think so. Is there like, or
No, okay.
if there is, it'd be like minor for mailboxes or something, or?
Right.
And
Okay,
I guess it's the part where, yes,
Yeah.
the housing side of things, that the houses they're building are different. That's what's gonna set
Yeah.
it apart. So to me, that's the part where they have the ability to set it apart. And like I said, I voice my opinion when it comes to the naming and consistency side of things for that piece, just because I live in a neighborhood that's very now disjointed because of how
all the
things
different
came into play.
developers.
That's a personal side of things. But when it comes to the requirements of what you're going to hold them to, then that's the part where they're pushing, it's within acceptable, but they're also pushing the bounds as well too, to be able to maximize what they can do. On this case, if D.R. Horton came in and said, we want 23 and 5 for all of the lots that they put in with Rivertown, would we have said yes?
Probably.
Maybe not.
Well, okay.
And I think that's the part where it's, well, and like I said, that's the
Sorry.
part where, but we
Yeah,
approved and we didn't have a problem with the 7.5, 15, because that's more of the norm, not the 5. So you talk about Del Webb's a retirement community. Come on, you can't even use that for anything else that we have, because that is a plat in and of itself. This is an extension of,
the harvest too, didn't we? There was other ones.
Mhm.
even,
Yeah.
I mean, the ones that we just,
Have other developments other than Del Webb that have implemented a 5-foot
how about the
setback.
ones that we just did to the east of Harvest that extended that on? So, right, I mean, like I said, getting into the details of it, it's just a matter of, like I said, I'm making the point of, you guys can choose what you want there, but I'm going to put the recommendations for the front and side setbacks to be at 25 and 7.5. Obviously, they don't have any corners, so you don't have to worry about the corner side of things. And that would be my recommendation, that we would hold them consistent with the extension of the neighborhood that they're completing.
Okay. So first, I guess then what we'll do, because Commissioner Olson has an opinion, he just needed to change the setback. So first, I think in order to establish this and solve this, why don't we take it, will someone make a motion to approve it the way city staff has it? And if it passes, then it passes. If it doesn't, then we can go back and revisit adding on a condition.
I don't think I've ever seen that before, so, okay.
I mean,
I'll make a motion that we accept what the city's offering.
Second.
so that would be Purdy and Gory. Is this appropriate way to do this?
Yeah,
We
that's
can,
fine.
well,
Yeah.
we can call roll on the vote, just so
Okay,
we
should we
have a
call
clear
roll on
indication of who's.
Setback issue first and then do a motion?
So there's a motion on the floor.
Okay, I already called a motion. Yep, now we're getting messy.
There's a second, so there, you need to have the vote.
You gotta vote.
on that. I guess it'd be at the chair's discretion as to whether you want to do a roll.
I think
Yeah.
if you
or
do
a voice
that,
vote.
enough people that want it this way, it'll pass and then that's resolves the issue.
Right, we just take it to the vote. I mean,
That's, yeah.
what it is.
So we got a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. So in the future, would we just call a roll of who wants to add it or not and then do the motion?
So I think maybe the thing to do, I mean, I don't think you necessarily did anything technically wrong just now. Anyone can make a motion. And they can state what their motion is for. I guess, an alternative version, could have been that someone would have made a motion, with, the addition of
Right, and then if it fails, then it fails, then you go back, make a new motion.
right, with the addition of a condition, related to setbacks or whatever, right?
Sure.
Whatever condition you're all talking about, and then that would get voted on or I suppose the motion would be put forward. Someone would need to second it. If there wasn't a second, it would die,
Fail.
or fail, maybe die is a,
Yeah, I like it.
so it would fail.
Okay.
Or, right, that motion be put forward, someone could second it, would go to the vote, you have to see how the vote shakes out. So you did everything technically correct
Sure.
in this situation.
Two different ways to go about it.
Yep,
Yeah, and
it's just
then,
how the motion is presented, and that's what you're voting.
and ultimately, if both motions would have failed, then it would just move to the city council with no recommendation.
Okay. All right, fair enough. So with that, I think you guys are good for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we get into the real fun stuff here, actually, with the non-conforming and variances structures. So if you would take away 7B for us, that'd be.
Yes, I promise a very,
You're gonna do, you're,
yeah,
all right, Liz.
I'm promising a very riveting presentation for you guys too.
Yep.
I tried to read this before I fell asleep, so forgive me.
I do not blame you whatsoever. And I will just preface that, a lot of this is kind of the first look at some of the amendments that are going to be coming through. And honestly, ordinance amendments can get really dicey. So feel free at any point to stop me, and if you want to talk over something a little bit more, I just want to open that door for you guys this evening, because it's very easy to get lost in kind of all the verbiage here. So we'll do our best to make this as painless as possible, but there might be pain.
Okay.
I just contradicted myself there, but anyways, so we have a zoning ordinance amendment request this evening that's being proposed by the city of Chaska. We're looking at 3 different sections of our zoning code. One is for our non-conforming structures and uses, non-conforming lots of record, and the variances section of our code. Just to give you a brief background, it was back in 2022 that we saw several land use applications come through. And during that time, we were kind of made aware of a lot of issues and inconsistencies that we have in our current zoning code. We realized at that point that we really needed to do a comprehensive review of our current code, look at where updates need to occur so that we can move forward with something that is more consistent with how the city practices our zoning. So we did engage with a consulting firm, HKGI, to help us in this zoning code audit process, which they've been looking at our code and starting to put together an analysis of how to tackle the code phase by phase. You guys, or most of the commission members here, were a part of a joint work session back in July of last year. So we met with the planning commission and city council to kind of provide that first look at the scope of work that the zoning code was initiating or touching on. So that was kind of that first discussion of, we're kicking off this process. Here's generally kind of what we're looking at. Does this make sense? Should we move forward with this? And we got favorable feedback to continue forward at that time. And so in the background, we've been working with the consulting firm to kind of draft up a plan and what we should move forward with. So this first request is what we'd like to call kind of one of our smaller lifts of what we will ultimately do in the long term. And focusing on areas that we know are inconsistent with what state statute practices or supersedes our code on, and making sure we have consistent code with state statute. So that's why we have the topics in front of you this evening for amendments relating to our non-conforming structures and lots, and then for our variances as well. So again, the purpose of bringing these forward, we felt are easier in terms of aligning with what state statute provides or puts in place for how we need to practice these topics. So getting into the first amendment area, which is for non-conforming structures and uses, we're basically doing some cleanup and inclusion of new language within this part of the code to align with state statute. One of the changes we're incorporating is under our restoration structures, which includes language on if a non-conforming structure were to be damaged in excess of 50% of its value, they have to apply for a building permit within 180 days of that damage in order to keep their non-conforming status. So this provision or language introduction is a full alignment with state statute. So that's something that is not really up for debate. That's something that we have to include in our code to align with state statute. The second area is regarding maintenance of non-conforming structures. We included an additional line in there in terms of how to treat general maintenance to non-conforming structure, which includes just clarifying language of if people were to do maintenance on a non-conforming structure, what they need to follow to do that so that they are not expanding a non-conforming structure or altering it in a way that is kind of adding to the non-conformity of it. So that is why we are including that language within that. And then the other change is regarding changes of non-conforming uses. We completely reworded this section. So this was a section we already had in the code. So we just took this opportunity to kind of reword this section just to provide more clarity. If for a non-conforming use, if it were to change in the future, that the language is more clear in terms of what applies out there.
So if I might chime in, just.
You change it into a more conforming use.
Right.
Right.
In any event that it changes, let's say it's a non-conforming use and they want to change the use of it.
Yeah.
It has to be in conformance with how this zoning code lays it out. So you either have to make it more conforming, or completely take away the non-conforming piece of it.
So just to add a little bit, I think, big picture, the goal when you're working with the non-conforming use is to either bring it into conformity, or if there's going to be movement in full conformity is not possible, you're moving it towards conformity, right? Rather than further away. And that's that clarification that we're trying to provide with what Liz was just describing.
Right.
You have an example on that one. That's the change one is kind of the one that's I'm a little.
Yeah, so recently, we just had one come through where we had a lot in downtown that had 2 homes on it, on one lot, which is non-conforming. And the owner of that wanted to do a lot split in order to have better flexibility in selling it, because, try to imagine selling one lot with 2 homes on it, it's kind of, your market's gonna be small. And so they want to do a lot split, to bring it into conformance, to be able to, sell the homes separately from each other. But when they did that, ran into an issue where the existing driveway on one of the homes would be, within the required setback, to that new lot line. But we ended up moving that forward because it was in more conformance than what it had been before. And recognized that given the situation of those 2 lots, getting full conformance, just wasn't gonna be a feasible option. So, things aren't always black and white, and sometimes you gotta be able to have a little bit of judgment, and flexibility when you apply things.
Right.
Downtown is a great example of, all sorts of nonconformities. And so we deal with that quite a bit, and trying to find that, acceptable solution when people are, attempting to do things with their property, is often a necessity. Yep.
Yep, another good example is towards a non-conforming structure. Let's say it's in the setback, and they want to make it more conforming by, let's say there was an addition added onto it, they take off the addition. So they're essentially making the non-conformity less as a part of that.
Do only with exterior type, like land usage and building, or would it also apply to interior stuff? Like my mind would go to like ADA accessibility, like it's a commercial building, and that's usually through a permitting process though, I think.
Yeah, so now you're getting building permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
territory. And
idea though, right?
Non-conformity, this portion of our code wouldn't apply to that situation.
Okay.
There's building code pieces that
Sure,
would
so
Right.
apply to that, but
Right.
that's a whole different.
Yeah, this is purely within the zoning ordinance.
The zoning
So if it's
structure.
applicable to a zoning topic, then it would fall under that. The other section that's getting amended is non-conforming lots of record. So when we talk about non-conforming lots of record, we're talking about lots that fall below minimum lot size requirements for a zoning district. And then applicable to this section, we're only talking about lots that were created before the adoption of this ordinance. So if a lot is created after the adoption of this ordinance, it doesn't apply, or the provisions within this ordinance do not apply. So it basically gives these lots of record exemptions to be able to be built on because they existed before the ordinance applied. So there's 2 main sections within this part of the code. One that's referring to just non-shoreland lots of record and how those get treated and how they get treated for if they can be built on or not. And then we have the second part for non-conforming lots that are considered shoreland or have lake frontage. So the first section with lots of record, we completely reworded this section. So this was a section we already had in this part of the code. So we did completely reword that to make it, again, more clear in terms of interpretation. And it speaks to, if it's a non-conforming lot, the minimum standards that have to be met in order for it to be eligible to be built on. So that pertains to the setbacks, or I'm sorry, it pertains to a minimum lot width that needs to be met. And then in the event that there are lots that are adjoining and have common ownership, if one of those lots is non-conforming, so falls below the minimum lot size standards, it's looking at the treatment of both of those. Is the other one a conforming lot? Or is it a conforming lot that's already been built on and they're the same ownership and they're next to each other? Basically, it means that they've already reasonably have used their property because they've built on the lot adjoining. So it doesn't give that exception, or exception to build on the non-conforming lot if the other part of the lot, has been built on or used. And so it gets into kind of that criteria when you have those different scenarios of adjoining lots. And then the section for non-conforming lots and shoreland, this is a completely new section that's being added to this portion of the code. And this one is to be in complete alignment with state statutes. So the language that we're bringing in here is basically from state statute, and it gives a different treatment of properties that are non-conforming if they're on shoreland. So they'll have a different set of criteria that they need to meet in order to make them eligible to be built on, if they're non-conforming. So I'm not going to go into all those specifics because it's very easy to just get into a tizzy with those. But if you have questions, certainly let me know. But that's kind of the breakdown of those two sections within the lots of record, non-conforming part of our code.
There's so an
Yep.
example of the two lots owned by same ownership. And the non-conforming would follow in. And so what would limit them from selling that non-conforming lot and that new landowner not being able to build on, or would they be able to build on?
So your question is, what limitations exist if they wanted to sell one of the lots? Well, per this ordinance, they wouldn't be able to sell the non-conforming one. So it doesn't give them a right, or basically a building eligibility on the non-conforming one, the way the ordinance is written.
They could still sell it, it would just be a non-buildable lot then.
Right. So they could sell it to their neighbor if they wanted to, and then they would have to combine that into the adjoining property. But effectively, the ordinance wouldn't allow them to give it building eligibility because it doesn't have that eligibility.
In your opinion, how big of an issue is this within Chaska? If you had to ballpark, we're talking 10, 15, 50 properties?
Yeah, it's really hard to put a value on it because we can never say never to some of these scenarios.
No, and that's the reason why it's like, are we talking
Yeah.
about a very
How
small?
often does it happen? I mean, I think at least with my time here, I have yet to be faced with that.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is I would not call this a prevalent
Right.
topic.
Right.
See,
Yep.
without, slapping a number on it, I don't know how we would do that accurately, but it's not common.
No.
But I mean, I should say, I would hope the city knows which lots are targeted for this ordinance change and are going to be impacted by this change.
Right.
Okay. And what kind of communication has been done with those landowners to make sure that?
I'm guessing you probably don't even know yet.
I'm guessing that one because it's the matter of how do we make sure that communication, I know we go back to last summer, it's like, how do we over communicate this so that those that we know are going to be impacted by this change know what the impact is going to be to them?
Right.
I mean, that would be my only statement on that one. It's like, I get the fact it's a very small subset, but from my seat, I would expect the city to be proactive to inform
Maybe send a letter or something.
those
Correct.
impacted owners, this is what is happening. And so that they can voice their concerns back to the city.
Now, if the lots already existed, though, it doesn't apply to them, correct?
Correct. I mean, they still have to meet the minimum criteria that's laid out.
That would be addressed in the building permit process.
That, our understanding, I mean, we're probably not going to go out and actively seek if there's, any lots that are non-conforming. Really, it would come up at the time that they wanted to make improvements to their property.
Right.
Or they're starting to ask questions about, hey, what can I do with this
Right.
other piece? And so at that time, it would be an education process of, here's here's what you can do, or here's what you can't do.
Then I saw in here, they can't, combine for a single tax parcel and then subsequently subdivide off later.
Right,
Yep.
yep. I mean, once you combine, you
That
take away that.
nonconformity.
I mean, it might help make it more conforming, so
Right.
depending on the situation,
Talking about for conformity or not.
right, yep. Mhm.
So we're really talking about people making improvements on a lot, essentially, right?
We're starting to look at
So that will,
buildability,
obviously, it's gonna be flagged when they call and go, I got this weird little teeny lot, I don't know what else, what can I do?
Right.
That's like, well, here's where we're at.
Yeah.
right. Mhm. Any other questions on this section?
The shoreland one basically is state statute just being slapped in here.
Correct, yep.
Should be an easy one to find from the state.
Mhm.
I would agree.
So if we don't agree with it, we could call them and yell at them.
Yep,
Make mistake.
Yeah. Okay.
all right, moving into variances. So the big change here is changing kind of our analysis terminology used for variances. So the old terminology referred to undue hardship. The new terminology, again, which is a state statute, change is moving to practical difficulty, as we're evaluating variances. So the difference between those, and I do like pointing to the definition change between them, just to give that clear understanding of what's changing. For undue hardship, the definition stated the property in question cannot be put to reasonable use if used under conditions allowed by the official controls. And then with practical difficulty, it states the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by an official control. And how I like to put it in general terms of kind of the change between undue hardship and practical difficulty. Practical difficulty allows for a request or is considered more permissive than undue hardship. Undue hardship is a little bit more hard and fast of you have to state a pretty strong case that you cannot reasonably use your property to be eligible or in the realm of being granted a variance. So it's kind of a harder definition to argue for compared to practical. Right.
And I think we talked about this, but to remind staff, so this is a state statute, and so we've actually been using practical difficulty the last so many years.
Yep.
Even though our zoning ordinance hadn't been changed.
Right, even though our zoning ordinance has not applied that new terminology.
So that change happened in what, 2011?
Mm-hmm, yep,
And so, under state statute, we've been obligated to that change since 2011. So, while this is saying new, the new thing is 12 years old.
right,
And so what we're doing is we're bringing our ordinance into conformity. State statute.
mhm,
The word of the day.
Right.
yeah,
I like that definition better because again, we just saw it. We have ravines that we deal with. We have a river that we deal with. We have a downtown that was platted in the 1850s, 1860s. So we got a lot of unique properties around here, which I think just gives us a little bit more flexibility as we move forward than with, each request that comes in that way.
Mhm.
And really, it just puts it, like Nate said, it puts the words to match our actions. And
Yeah.
that's the critical part
Yeah.
there, where it's like, we weren't following the ordinances, we were doing whatever we wanted to.
Right.
Now it's the,
Yeah, because undue hardship is like, well, that's not really an undue hardship.
Practically, you guys, it sounds, it sounds, staff, it sounds the same to me. This is where attorneys make, a lot of money. Figuring out little word phrases that sound exactly the same, but.
Right.
Mhm.
That's why I like to, I wanted to incorporate maybe an example just to show kind of how you would look at it differently from each of these lenses. So the example that I have is, say a property wants to build an addition on their existing detached garage, but they're not meeting setbacks. So they're requesting a variance from the setbacks is essentially. So under undue hardship, the question that you're asking towards that request is the existing property being used reasonably without the variance? So do they already have a reasonable use of the property? And I like to see that more as, do they have a house on the property? Do they have a driveway? Do they have a garage? Kind of those basic pieces that you need to be able to reasonably use your property. And that's just putting it in general terms. And that can be looked at in a variety of ways as you're analyzing that. But that's just generally how you can look at it and ask that question. So is the existing property already being reasonably used without the variance? Or does the variance allow them to reasonably use the property? So in this instance, with this scenario, you can argue, yes, they're already reasonably using their property because they currently have a detached garage. And then if an alternative reasonable use is available, such as having that existing garage, no variance could be granted under undue hardship, the way that analysis is written out. And this method also requires the property owner to show that there was no reasonable use available without the variance. And then if you were to look at this scenario in the practical difficulty lens, the question that you're asking, is the request for the variance reasonable? So is what they're requesting a reasonable ask? And for this one, we could argue, yes, the request for a garage addition is a reasonable request. They're not asking for something that's very atypical for the property. And something that could be atypical or unreasonable is maybe they want to put a satellite tower on their property. So not something that you necessarily need to reasonably use your property. But again, going back to this scenario, the request for a garage addition is what we could consider a reasonable request. And therefore, a variance could be granted as long as they meet the criteria that's laid out for that variance request.
I think,
So
or
hopefully.
maybe a little more generally speaking, I want to be clear here. Variance requests are going to be weighed on the merits of the specific request. So while this is, using the example here, for anyone listening, thinking about a garage expansion that needs a variance, we're not saying that that's by right going to be, awarded either, right? So it's going to be working with that specific situation, understanding, what that is, and you work with the facts at hand. But bigger picture, undue hardship is a higher threshold to cross as it was defined and written in statute. Practical difficulty is lowering that threshold a little bit. And allowing more discretion to the planning commission and then ultimately the city council who's making that decision as to, whether, they feel that, the facts at hand, meet that threshold or not. So it's giving a little more discretion to the local, decision makers. And that's what that change in state statute ultimately did. So it's case by case basis, variance requests need to come in, and substantiate, that specific request. And I think the practical result of this here is, we're again aligning with state statute. The practice that you would see from us as we're evaluating variances isn't going to change from what you've experienced because we're already beholden to the practical difficulty, measure thresholds.
Then the only other real change here is the 60-day period versus 45.
Right, and
Basically.
60 days aligns with state statute. I'm not really sure where the 45 days originated from. But the 60 days is in alignment with statute requirements for response. And also just want to point out, the major change is between undue hardship and practical difficulty, but the criteria that's used to evaluate variances is not changing between those two. So there's still a 3-factor test that has to be used to evaluate variances. So again, to Nate's point earlier about, even though we have to kind of weigh in case by case basis of the reasonableness of the request, there's still a list of criteria that variances have to meet in order for us to come to a conclusion to grant that variance. So we're talking about the 3-factor test that talks about reasonableness, uniqueness, which is the unique characteristics of the property that are not created by the property owner. And then number 3 is essential characters. So how is the variance request fitting into the locality that it's locating in? Or is it creating an outcome that is making it stand out from kind of the essential character of the locality it's locating in? So that criteria is substantial as we go through that variance evaluation process. And yes, we have been already using the practical difficulty analysis since 2022 at the latest, but even before that time, a little bit. So effectively, this change that we're bringing into our ordinance is just aligning with what we're already practicing. So we don't see this change as a significant change in how we're going to be operating moving forward. It's just aligning with what's currently being done. So in conclusion, we're going to ask for 2 different motions this evening. One is to recommend approval of the zoning ordinance amendment to section 15.04.050, which is for the non-conforming structures and uses. And also within that section 15.04.060 for non-conforming lots of record, based on the draft ordinance for those 2 amendments. And then a second motion to recommend approval of the zoning ordinance amendment to section 15.08080 for variances, and then based on the draft ordinance for that section. This is a public hearing for this request this evening. If it does move forward, it will go to City Council on Monday, February 26th.
Thank you, Liz. Obviously no one here. Can you check real quick online?
Yeah, there's no one online either.
Okay. So then it's back to, is there any further discussion?
Do you have to open and close it?
I do, don't I? I'll open the public hearing at 8:14 and close it at 8. So now we're back. We're back. Any further discussion for anybody? Okay, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the zoning ordinance amendment that would modify section 15.04.050 non-conforming structures and uses, and section 15.04.060 non-conforming lots of record of the zoning ordinance to read as the attached draft ordinance. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Gruber, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I will also make a motion to recommend approval of the zoning ordinance amendment that would modify section 15.08.080 variances of the zoning ordinance to read as the attached draft ordinance. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Madison, all those approved? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
So before we move to the next item, I just want to preview, this was a first, zoning ordinance amendment here of hopefully what we to the year. He's kind of touched on that when she kicked off, but I just wanted to reiterate kind of the strategy that we're trying to pursue behind this, so you all know what to expect as we're moving forward. And you might recall when we had the work session in July, or I should maybe expect that you may have. That's okay. But there are items that we identified in our at audit that maybe are out of alignment with state statute, and then there are items that are out of alignment with maybe practice or current best practices, because time has changed, right? And so the way that we're planning to proceed here is those items that align with state, are about purely alignment with state statute, kind of that lowest hanging fruit. A lot of, I guess, direction from you all discussion, because the state legislature has provided that for us, right? So we're going to work on those and get those done. The next thing that you're going to see on that topic, I expect, will be our shoreland ordinance, and aligning that. There's a model code that the DNR publishes and that we're supposed to align with. So there's things that need to happen to that section of our code to make sure that we're, adequately aligning. So that's going to be our next task. Then in addition to that, staff is working with the consultant at Hoisington that you all met, Jeff Miller. And we're beginning to analyze our code in more detail, thinking about the special regulations section of our zoning code that really sets a lot of the requirements as it pertains to things like the architectural requirements, in a lot of and we'll be looking at that. We do intend to have joint work session on these topics that are a little bit more discretionary with council and you all to talk about each of these things as we go through the process. Since we use planned use districts as our primary way of zoning, newly zoned properties, that's going to be what we're seeing as our last order of business, because what we want to do is get, those planned use districts are intended to be fairly wide open, so to speak, give a lot of discretion to align with planning, or I'm sorry, to align with our comprehensive plan, and maybe area specific plans, and bring those visions to fruition and codify them, working with the developer to achieve the desired outcome for that site, right? But then they're based on the direction that's given throughout the rest of the code. So what we want to do is get that basis that we're putting our requirements forward on sound, and people feeling confident in that before we get into the planned use districts, which really kind of sit on top of everything else, right? So I hope that's making some sense, but what we want to try and do is get you all feeling comfortable. That's why we'll set up that planned use district section last in order. And hopefully maybe you can trust us, become more clear as we go through the process too. Each step of the way on these discretionary topics, we will have joint work sessions. So I think we're looking at like 3 of those as we go throughout the year, to get your feedback and input and give staff direction so that we're drafting, these zoning changes in a way that aligns with your perspectives.
Then I was gonna ask, maybe it would be beneficial going forward, like tonight, probably not needed, right? We're copying stuff from state statute. It's pretty straightforward. Once we get further in down the year and it's a little more complicated, or it's more in depth, or it's more ambiguous, or it's up to us to determine the new ordinance, maybe beneficial to have the city attorney at the meeting to answer questions. If we start to get into like a legal thing, can we change this or not, or should we agree to it? Just to have someone that is more knowledgeable in the language for us. Really, like tonight wasn't needed, but sounds like it's gonna get, I feel like you're saying it's gonna get more difficult, so.
Maybe, yeah, I think.
Meteor,
It's
yes.
gonna get meatier,
Okay.
I mean, it'll get into things where, there's no state statute directive,
Right.
right? And so we're kind of, when I say, discretionary, it's the zoning code ends up you know, not to get too emotional about it on Valentine's Day, but you know, the zoning code really ends up being how we express our vision, right? And our community's desires for how things should develop, right? And so in that way, there's nothing in state statute yet that says, you know, what the parking ratio needs to be, for example, right? That's kind of a reflection of what we think is appropriate, and, you know, it's to some extent, being informed by the development community too, and what, you know, that's kind of how we've approached that one. That example, thinking about multifamily projects, that's just thinking. So, well, what makes sense for this building, what does your market look like, and that kind of stuff. So, you know, we get to decide that one. And there's some science behind it, but it's not a pure science. And yeah, so that's where we'll kind of get to wrestle with some of that stuff and figure out what makes sense.
All right, I'll bring it back then. Appreciate the clarification. So other business, recommend appointment. This is what I was telling the staff. This is the awkward part where we need to vote in chair and vice chair. Obviously, I'm doing the chair now. Would like to continue to do it, enjoy it, and I've been happy to
Yeah, my vote.
hopefully
Me
continue to
too.
do it. Hopefully continue to do it, but and then in addition, I'd recommend Urbanski to be vice chair.
You need a second?
If I fail to
Only
perform to my
meetings that
duties.
Last less than 15 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I need to make a motion or do I?
No, I guess it's two motions, it looks like, so we'll start with, I'll start with the vice. I would make a motion to recommend Todd Urbanski to be vice chairman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I don't want to make my own motion.
I make the motion to make Rob Brass chairman of the planning commission.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Then let's go back to agenda. Other business, receive other meeting minutes, hereby receive those. And then before we make a motion to adjourn, is there anything final city want to discuss? Any activities, things going
Can I ask a
on?
question?
Yeah.
We're doing all this beautification at Chaska. What's going to happen with that KFC building?
Oh, God.
I get questions about that all the time. We're spending all this money to beautify.
What?
We're spending all this money to, you know, make Chaska a beautiful city. We've got a KFC building that's been sitting there for 16 years,
Yeah.
empty.
Yeah,
I got a guy that wants to turn it into a car rental place.
okay.
I think they talked to you a few years ago and they're like, nah, like a Hertz or something, you know, like a car rental.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is kind of at the discretion of the owner. My understanding is that it was recently purchased.
Mhm.
Was it?
Yeah, so if you may remember, I don't know how many of you would.
Or is
know
it
that
gonna be
planning
an
commission.
Asian restaurant?
Yeah, there's going to be, an Asian.
With,
China Pagoda.
It's supposed to
Pagoda.
be this one over here moving there, right?
Yeah,
Yep,
that's
Are
who
you
owns
saying
it, right?
Did change
China
hands?
Pagoda owns it, right?
China Pagoda's, some family members associated with the owners of China Pagoda had owned it, and they had gone through that process with, you know, the idea that they would move over there.
Yeah.
You know, I guess, I don't know, whatever reasons that are, you know, personal to them, they ended up not, you know, going through with that, obviously. I guess recently it was, and then that property had been listed for some time, for sale. Recently, I guess it was sold and purchased. The current owner, I believe, owns and operates a number of, I think mostly Mexican restaurants, but I think there's some variety in their portfolio on that too. So I haven't had any conversations with them yet. I don't know, Liz, if you have.
It's got to
I
be a
haven't.
tear down, isn't it? I mean,
I hope
sitting
so.
for 16 years, it's got to be a tear down, doesn't it?
It's gotta be what?
A tear down?
Oh, you know, I don't know that it has to be, but I think practically.
I imagine there's rats and everything else in there.
So I think I mean, those KFC buildings aren't necessarily, nothing against KFC, but I don't know if they're necessarily building top of the line, you know, buildings to last. So yeah, I think that is a big question as to how usable is that.
It's to last this.
I think there's been a lot of updates to, you know, food requirements
Right.
since
Right.
that building has operated, so.
Right, so what would it take to bring it up to code, and is that even really, if he's a new owner, we'll get to dive into all those good questions.
I'm just glad it's sold.
Yeah. I think we would love to see something happen there.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was fairly recent, a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Sold in October.
And then Cooper's is closing,
Yep,
right? Or are they closed now? already?
March 2nd, I believe.
Okay.
I heard Red Bench is putting in a speakeasy behind them.
Yep.
They are. yeah.
That's interesting.
I've seen the Cooper's space on the market for a while now, actually, for lease or for is the whole place for sale? I can't recall, but have you seen any activity on it?
You know,
Any inquiries?
building has been I guess a long, discussion, right? That's been going on with the Cooper family, the Klein, some of the Klein family members own the building property.
Yep.
The city's been engaged with them for longer than I've been around, trying to work with, Gary and the Klein family and figure out, how can we ensure their long-term, continued stay in Chaska. We've tried a lot of different things and, for a whole host of reasons that, Gary's making the decision that he is. So, personally, I'm sad to see them going. I know a lot of people feel that way. And so we'll be working with, continue to work with the Klein family. See kind of what the opportunities might be. I think from the city's perspective, if we could figure out a way to get a grocer in there, that would be the ideal outcome. But, recognizing that the grocery business is a low margin, difficult business, we'll see, we'll see what happens, but that's, if it were my world to control, I think, I'd love to see a grocery store go back in there, and I think that's, what we're trying to pursue. We'll see what happens.
Okay. I have no others. Guys have anything else?
Nothing.
Everyone's ready for adjourn? Anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Got motion?
Okay, second by Olson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned.